Good evening. It is Thursday night, and this is Mike. I'm coming to you from the West Coast, and we're going to do some things tonight. One of which we're going to carry on a little bit further on what I talked about earlier today. So I'm going to talk about the subject of fear, once again, trusting God in and everything, in all situations. And as I alluded to the fact, we're going to talk about the story of Daniel into the lion's den, way down below, under that den where all those vicious beasts were, and what happened to him down there. So this happened way back in history. For those of you that aren't too familiar, or you might be familiar with the Bible, such and such, what have we. But we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to go into the other story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is another story that maybe kind of has a similar theme than the Daniel theme. So let's just get going. And for those of you that don't know who I am Michael Jeff. And this is the Yoga Lounge channel. It's been around for about 5 years. It's sort of developed into what it is now, which is, we talk about yoga, we talk about Christianity, we talk about whatever is popular. We may have some music, some performance from time to time. I'm going to take this channel into new directions, thinking out of the box, out of the way, into the high stories, wherever we can go with this. So I'm bringing doing some interviews coming up, like I mentioned the other day, if you had seen my yoga video. So let's get into this right away. We're going to find out who this Daniel character was and what this has to do with what is happening in our present day society and what people are going through in relation to what happened to him back then, and how he had immeasurable faith in God, which got him through these treacherous circumstances, which anybody else probably would have been scared out of their mind, and they would have just ran away, or they would have they couldn't have faced up to it, or whatever. We're talking about men of faith, back then, that had such incredible courage and fortitude that just went through anything. Nothing compared what we're going through to what they went through back then. And this other story, of course, I mentioned before, will follow after that. So let's get right into this. Fear of when you have little faith, not much faith, you're kind of you live in kind of a discouraged state. You're discouraged all the time. You're negative sometimes. You're feeling like you're not coping. You don't want to communicate with other people when we get in this negative and we get into this fearful state. So what I try to do with the topic of yoga and the spiritual things and what have we, it helps us to get into what we call like the present state. So out of the illusion, which is the Maya state, back into the present. And so that's what I talk about a lot. And that's why I like to teach a lot of these yoga classes on some of these videos. So you'll notice that I kind of deviate from teaching a class to then giving a talk or a lecture. It's sort of like going with the flow, whatever feels good. Some days are this, some days are that, and that kind of keeps it a little interesting and maybe makes it more interesting for you people out there that are watching. So let's begin. I'm going to turn on a little bit of light, and I'm kind of fired up once again, off camera just for a second there, and let me just do this here as we get started. I think we're light enough. Okay. So, slowing down a little bit, and so maybe I can try to grab your attention here, and see where we're going with this. So, back in those days, things were a lot different. Men, lovers of gold and money and silver and whatever. They, lovers of, they worshipped other gods. They worshipped idols, back in those days. They worshipped things. So there's a lot of idolatry going around. And which is kind of the equivalent of today, where we worship and we kind of idolize the sports figures, we idolize the entertainers. So we set these idols before us, particularly these real famous celebrities, more famous sports figures in this world. And we put them up on a pedestal, kind of almost like we're not kind of in denial of ourselves, because we're still thinking of ourselves, but we kind of put them above everything else, even above God, or in a sense. So, and that's where it kind of relates to back then. So people used to bow down before idols, before the idols of, before the golden statues of Pharaoh and people like this, and King Nebuchadnezzar, and who we're going to talk about today. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So if you want to turn with me in your Bibles today. And so let's go to Daniel chapter 6. Okay. So let's get started with this. And I'm just going to kind of go through this and give you, just my rundown and what I'm kind of feeling about this, and then try to make an equation of what's happening today and how we should not be afraid, because God kind of protects us in every situation. We don't have to have that immense fear, because God, like I said before, God doesn't let anything happen to you that is out of His will. So, we don't have to think, oh, I better not go out the door. Oh, I better not go, I better not go out tonight because it's raining, or, it's dark outside, or it's late, or it's this, or it's that, because something might happen. Okay, so right away, when we do that, we're stepping into the illusion state, and we're going out of, we're kind of, because fear is kind of like in a way, it's not really a sin, but the Bible kind of says it is. The sin of fear, perfect love casts out all fear. So we're stepping out of the faith. We're going into illusion. All right. So let's read on here, and I'm going to try to get this into description the best that I can. So if you want to turn to me to Daniel chapter 6, it seemed good to Darius. This is the king back then that he put 120 satraps over the kingdom, and they would be in charge of the whole kingdom. And over the 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, so this is Daniel that we're talking about, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Okay, then it goes on to say, then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among commissioners and satraps, because an extraordinary spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. So this king, we're talking about King Darius here. That was a long, long time ago. So he was in favor of Daniel. He knew Daniel had this incredible gift. He was very talented as a leader. So he set him. And so there was jealousy. So there was jealousy among the Jewish people of Daniel. So his comrades, or shall we say colleagues, were jealous of him. And so when Jews or whoever, or Christians, even Christians, they get jealous of other people, they do things that they would not ordinarily do. But because of this jealousy, it drives them to maybe do things that detract from their statute, or that might make them seem a little bit less of a person when they do these things, or in a better respect, it kind of loses their favor with God because they compromise their basic faiths and their basic trust or religions or what have we too, because of this jealousy. And let's get back to this darkness in the planet. Okay, so moving on. So this is what happened. So then there was these commissioners, okay, that were appointed by this King Darius. So we will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. Then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors have counseled together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction. Now get this, here's where I'm going with this, that anyone who seeks to make a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days should be cast into the den of lions. Okay, so now this is where where it's going with this. Because of this, so they're trying to find something that they're trying to accuse him of worshiping another god other than the king, which kind of goes against the decree. Okay, so let's just go. We're going to try to make this a long. I'm going to skip a few verses here. So therefore, King Darius signed the written document that is the injunction. Now, okay, when Daniel knew that the written document was signed, he entered his house. Okay, now so he went back into his house, which he had windows kind of opening in the house, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously, okay? So then these men, okay, they came up again and said, okay, we got to get this guy, okay. So then they came by agreement and found Daniel seeking to make a petition and making supplication before his one and only God. Okay. So then they came near and said to the king concerning the king's injunction, did you not sign an injunction that any man who seeks to make a petition to any god besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den? The king then answered, the word is certain, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Okay, so then they answered and said before the king, Daniel of the exiles from Judah, and pays no attention to you, Mr. King, O king, or to injunction with the injunction that you sign, but keeps seeking to make his petition 3 times a day. Okay, so now they're kind of they're trying to persuade this king, and the king, once, like I said before, he had favor for Daniel. Okay, so then as soon as the king heard the word, he was greatly distressed. And his mind on saving Daniel, and even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to deliver him. But then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed. Okay, so now this is where we're going to this, and he was eventually going to be cast into that den of lions. So as we move toward Daniel 6:16. So now we're finding out what the king is going to do to Daniel. So the king answered and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself save you. But a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Okay, so now he'd confided in, he was going to put him in the lion's den because after all, he signed that decree. Okay, so the king went off to the palace and spent the night. He slept, no entertainment was brought before him. So now we're moving into the next day. The king arose. So the king wakes up. He's kind of wondering, my gosh, what is going to happen to that man? I put him into this life, and I didn't really want to do this, but these other commissioners kind of talked me into this. So when he arose at dawn at the break of the day and hurriedly went to the lion's den. When he had come near the den to Daniel. He cried out with a troubled voice. The king answered and said, Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you constantly serve been able to save you from these lions, these ferocious beasts? It doesn't say the ferocious beasts, it just says lions. That was just my interjection. Then Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also towards you, O king, I have done no harm. Okay, so then he was saved from this, and the king too he was shocked. He was surprised, because what he did was a cowardly, maybe I would call a thing, but actually, when he had favor for this man actually doing that, but he did it just because of the law and the rules of men. So again, pleasers of men. He was a king, so he was more concerned about his statute. Okay, so then Darius, the king, wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every tongue who were inhabiting all the land, may your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and be in dread before the God of Daniel. Now listen to what it said, before the God of Daniel. So now the king has really changed. It has changed him. This faith has brought him into a different place. So I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and to be in dread before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and enduring forever. And his kingdom is one which will be not destroyed, and his dominion will be unto the end. All right, so this is kind of what happened to Daniel in the lion's den. So the commissioners, they came up against him. They persuaded the king. The king had favor in him, but the king kind of went against his what was really in his heart because of these commissioners, and because of all of this cycle, he got thrown into these den of lions. But God saved him through that. Imagine being put in a den of lions, where you have these are not just little kitty cats. I mean, they're like ferocious beasts. And back in those days, that's what they did to Christians and people. They would throw them into these arenas, where it'd be kind of like the modern day stadiums and these big football games and things like that, where people are applauding. But today, everything is much more civilized. Thank goodness. But back in those days, it was a lot different. So Daniel, and which just goes to show you, and I'm going to stop right here at this point on this subject, and then move on to the next. This is what God, if he doesn't want something to happen, if he's protecting his chosen one, his child, he saved him from what would seem like the impossible. Okay, so that's just demonstrate on how much, if we trust God, even if we don't trust God, he won't let anything happen to us or anybody unless it is in his will that something would happen for whatever reason, because God is God, we are we. Okay, so let's move on to the next story. So the next story is a little bit shorter, and there's similarities between these two stories. So we're going to turn to, let's see here, Daniel, once again. So we're back into, so this is goes back to the king Nebuchadnezzar. Some of you have heard that interesting name before, Nebuchadnezzar, the great king. Okay, so this is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So in this story, they had, and I was talking about at the beginning of this video, that they had golden idols back in those days, where these were like big statues. And if you remember back in the time of Moses, when he came down, and the people were all worshiping this big idol and these big things. So in those times, people were actually worshipped in a literal sense, big golden statues, and these were like huge things. And so these were made out to be their gods, or their god, which they substituted for the real God. which basically was an excuse for them to go on sinning or doing whatever they're doing, and that's still what we do today. We worship the god of money, we worship the god of whatever, the god of, these big cars that we buy, these, Lamborghinis, these expensive Jaguars, just so we can show off. And these are our idols today. Back then, they had, they made their way around by foot, and camels and things like that. They didn't have these fast methods of. They didn't have these high-speed trains, bullet trains, and certainly they didn't have the Air Force jets and all that. If people would have seen some of those things, they would have freaked out. They would have said, "That's like something from outer space. We can't, that just doesn't happen, because our times, this must be like sometime like way in the future." They would say, "What is this falsification that we're seeing?" If people start seeing, if back then they saw what we have today and the technology and what have we. All right, so I'm kind of going really quick. So let me just slow down. I'm going to get a cup of drink, and I want to try to get this all in, so I don't have to go into two parts once again. So I hope you're all having a good night, and once again, I thank you for joining me, if you haven't turned it off by now. But if you made it this far, that means you're somewhat into what I'm saying, and some of this stuff resonates with you. So let's go on to this is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And some of you may know this story. So I'm going to carry on where I talked about the image of the golden idol, that big, it was like so if you can imagine, okay, so this thing, let me just read here. Nebuchadnezzar, he was the king. He made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Okay. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps. So we're talking about the satraps. And the satraps were, if you don't know who those were, they were like governors of a province in ancient Persian or in the Median empires. So he sent the word out to assemble the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the counselors, and the treasurers, and the judges, and the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. All right? So then the satraps and all the magistrates, the treasurers, were assembled for the dedication of this image, or this big tall statue that people were to worship, and the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So then the herald loudly called out, "To you it is said, O peoples, nations, and men of every tongue." And at that time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music. You are to fall down. Okay, so then now he's commanding the people, this King Nebuchadnezzar is telling the people that when you hear these trumpets blare and this music, then you're to fall down and worship this golden idol. So, but whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. So he's telling the people that if you don't follow this order and worship this idol, no matter what your thinking is, even if your faith is in your real God, but this is my rule, and this is what's going to happen to you if you don't fall on your knees and before this golden idol. So here's what happened. So therefore at the time the people heard the sound of the horn and all kinds of music, and all the peoples and the nations and men of every tongue fell down, worshiped the golden idol image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. But now let's go on a little bit further, and we're going to find out about these three men here. For this reason, at the time, certain Chaldeans came near and brought charges against the Jews. They answered and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, "O king, live forever. You have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, and bagpipe and all kinds of music is to fall down, okay? But whoever does not fall down shall be cast into the midst of this furnace, or this really hot fire. So there are certain Jews, okay, now let's listen to what this says here. There's certain Jews who have been appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, and purely their name was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, do not pay attention to you. They do not serve your gods, and do not worship the golden image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and wrath, said to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said unto them, Is it true? Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you are not serving my gods and do not worship that image that I have set up? Okay, so he's kind of talking to them, asking them what they're trying to really get it out of them. Where is your faith? Where does your faith lie? At the time, you heard the horn, flute, bagpipe, and all kinds of music. Then you shall fall down. Okay, so then he's saying at the time, so he's telling them that, okay, when you hear this, the music and the bagpipe and the flute and the trumpet, horn, if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the fiery, hot furnace, okay? So they answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to respond to you with an answer concerning this. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to save us from the furnace, and he will save us out of your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden image that you have set up. So this is an active rebellion. And I might just add, like people of today, they don't have this, a lot of people, they don't have this rebellion, and they do whatever they're told to the governments, to whoever. And I'm saying rules are always good. It's good to have governments set up, but sometimes these governments put themselves ahead of God. Okay, and so, but most people they acquiesce, and even though the government says you got to do this and do this and do this, we don't like your religion or whatever, so you must. And they don't really, we have freedom of religion over here in this country, but this might be happening in other places in the world where they're very much more strict on religion, and where religion and government kind of coincide. So anyway, I'm going on a tangent here, but so what happened? So they said that they were not going to serve, they were not going to do this. Okay, so then what he did, he was filled, this Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and the image of his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he answered and said, into the fiery furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he said to the mighty men of valor who were in his military host to tie him up. So tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace. Then these men were tied up in the trousers, their coats, their caps, their clothes, and were cast in the midst of the fire of this furnace of blazing fire. So for this reason, because of the king's word was urgent, and the furnace had been heated so extraordinarily, to an extraordinary degree, the flame of the fire killed those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, okay, so now get this what it's saying here. These 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. And now Nebuchadnezzar, he was getting curious okay, so what happened is he was astounded and hurriedly stood up. He answered and said to his high officials, was it not 3 men we cast into this midst of fire? They answered and said to the king, certainly, O king. He answered and said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, in the appearance of a 4th. So it's talking about a 4th man who was not originally cast in here. So who was this 4th person? So was this an angel? Was this an angel that God sent down? So we don't know that. It speaks of that. So the 4th is like a son of God. Maybe it was talking about Jesus. So we don't know who that was. So then it goes on to say, let's see if I can even turn my page here. Okay, so then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace, blazing fire. He answered and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. So then they came, and then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the king's high officials gathered around in regard to these men that had no power over their body, over the fire, the fire had no power over their bodies of these men, nor was their hair not even singed, or were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of the fire, not even the smell of the fire. So everything else was singed, it was burnt, that would have been burnt was not even, it was almost, can you imagine like a model or a perfect looking person coming out of this fire? They would probably be maybe just their skeleton would be left. Okay, but these men were in perfect condition. Okay, so that's kind of what happened. So now Nebuchadnezzar went on to say, therefore, as it goes on into Daniel 3:29, I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. So now, once again, so we see the correlation between King Darius and Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar is now shifting his faith, and he is now, because of what God, this miracle that God has performed, he saved them from this fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar has turned and has, he was probably a very prideful, very stubborn king, that his feelings about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God has changed because of all this that has transpired. So now I'm going to sort of just kind of sum up everything and to see and how it correlates to today. And I'm going to take a quick little break here and grab a sip of coffee, and I'm going to close up in a minute. A little bit off camera there. So let me get on a little bit. It's kind of dark there. That's okay. Let's shift the light back on. So maybe we'll go a little bit less. All right. So let's equate that to today, real briefly. So here we see these men. First of all, we have Daniel, who was cast into with the lions, and then he made it through this. This was insurmountable danger, unlike what we have seen anything like that of today. And then we had these three men that were conspired against because of jealousies or because of whatever, because they weren't following the king, and people, they followed their kings and governors, and if they felt that anybody was in disagreement with that, people would gang up against them. And that kind of brings to mind one more story, that when everybody kind of, when they used to stone people in those days or whatever. And so all these men were ready to, and I'm going to talk about this at a later date, they were ready to stone this, I think it was like a woman or whatever. And so, but then they all kind of walked away, because Jesus said to them, he who is without sin cast the first stone, and he was writing something down on the ground. So Christ was actually, I don't know, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later. So he was writing something. We don't know what he was writing. He was probably, from my guess, Jesus was actually probably writing the names and maybe the sins of each of those men. And so what they did is, once Christ said that, they all departed because they all had sin. So there was nobody, not one of those men that were ready to condemn this woman was without sin, not one. So they all walked away. So that's another kind of thing where jealousies, where people ganged up on people, and you see it in our times right now. How quickly the media is to put down, let's say, people or celebrities, or they talk behind their back. There's a lot of backstabbing going on. There's a lot of gossip and all this terrible. And like I said before, really I can't stand this kind of stuff. But it's going to continue to go on. It's just the way people are in general. We're all like that. We all tend to, if we don't catch ourselves, we tend to gossip a little bit about other people. We talk behind their backs, so people, they don't do it face to face. They do it, people do it in a cowardly way. They talk behind their back, which is even worse. And the person that they're talking about does not have a chance to defend themselves. So this is going on today. But anyway, so as it goes to show you, the correlations between this time and how we have the gossips, the backstabbers, the media today, not just the media, but I mean, talking about the, people in general, all of us, how we put down even our friends, we can't help it. It's just our sinful, it's our nature. And they were doing it back then, but they were doing it in a much more vicious way back then. They would actually bring people up before the magistrate or the king or the commissioners or what have we, and so they would try to get these people that they felt were not following the decrees of the king and that were following a god, their God, which is the true God above the king. They would say this is not right, and so these people should be put to death, and that's what they did back then. Thank goodness they don't do that today. Today we're in it's the age of technology in a much different time. Everything is very civilized, but we're still doing that, but just in a, shall we say, a reticent kind of a way. So I'm just going to get back to my original statement, and then I'm going to close out. I don't know how long I went on. I think I'm going really, really fast tonight. So it's now. Looks like I've been going on almost an hour, so I'm going to pull out here and call it a night. So I just want to say that, my original was, we don't have to, and I said this the other day, we don't have to fear, we don't have to, there isn't, we don't, when we start fearing, we start getting into, we stepping out into an illusion. We're not living out of a state of positivity or perfect love. And so we're already getting into that. So, so just by showing you the example of what happened to these two, or in these two different stories, and there's many other stories probably like this, they're similar, of how God brought them through. God brought these people through, saved them from what would normally be terribly disastrous or, an incredible, tortuous, deathly, undescribable situation. But God, in other words, moved mountains for them, because God is God and people are people. So we have to get with that thought, God is God, and we are just very minute compared to God. So God, we have a God that can do anything. Anything. I mean, that is, there's nothing, when it comes to if God is with you, who could be against you? So there's, it's of infinite. God could, if we really believed it and used 100% of our brain and our, and had that kind of faith, like we talked about before, we'd be able to move mountains. But we limit ourselves because we live in this state of, we're in this illusion state, the Maya, and so it kind of cuts off that that cord, that spiritual, or that that power of God that can come through us. But sometimes when we have the faith, God will save us. We've heard of incredible stories where God has saved people, And that's why just one more thing, one more note before I close. That's why you have a lot of these missionaries and these people that go to other countries in the world, and they put their lives at risk, for different causes. That may be giving people medical help, whatever, or preaching the gospel to these other places in Africa or remote places, risking their lives. But it's because they have the faith. And they have this understanding within their spirit that nothing's going to happen that God will allow unless He allows it, and that's just the way it is. Won't allow it, unless it's bound to happen. So we don't have to worry about it. We just. And that's why, it just gets back to just, living, and just doing the best. And that's not to say we're never going to have any fear, because it does happen. But these are kind of, if we think about some of these stories and these, we see the similarities. We can kind of identify that within ourselves and come to these, to maybe living in a different way. And so, anyway, so this is just, again, coming from my belief system, and hey, you may not believe any of this. I mean, this may just sound like a bunch of hogwash and a fairy tale, and and that's okay. If you there's another belief system or another, you're coming from another place, and there's a lot of different philosophies out there, and because we live in a land of free will, free speech, and everything. So these are just ideas that I'm a firm believer in that this is the Word of God, and so everybody comes from a different place. So with that in mind, I'm coming back to earth, Mike. Okay, so I'm going to be back tomorrow night. With because I mentioned the other day, I think on yesterday's Ocean and Sun Energy Yoga, that I know some of you may have seen that video. Actually, I was pretty happy with the way it turned out. So I mentioned I'd be back with a yoga class on Friday night. So please join me tomorrow night if you have time. If you'd like to tune in, and it would probably be sometime later tomorrow night. So have a great good night, and I'm saying good night or good morning. I don't know what time it is where you are, but I hope you enjoy this and you got something out of it.